Hi, good morning. First of all, I just want to say that it's a huge honor to be here. Very happy to be here with you guys. And to talk to you about artificial creativity and what we're going to think about songs that are artificially composed. And to talk about artificial creativity, I want to mention three things, and I want to go through three things. Stone blocks, hamburgers, and synthesizers. Don't worry, there's a logic to all of this, okay? So first of all, let's start with stone blocks because it was credited to Michelangelo to once have said that inside every stone block there's a statue. And it's up for the artist to find that statue. And with the advances of AI, the similar question was posed. Could algorithms also find beauty where there isn't? Could they create art? Could they create music? And the answer is absolutely yes. And one of the main pioneers that actually had a huge impact was Professor David Cope from the University of California. And what happened to him is maybe something similar that happened to you. He was hired to write a particular piece, the deadline came close, but he hit a writer's block. He couldn't have any ideas. So he decided to try and code a software to try and solve that problem. And that was the very beginning of what later became AMI, or EMI, for Experimental Musical Intelligence, which essentially was a software that through three simple stages, or logical stages, better saying, was able to compose a number of compositions resembling famous previous composers. So he would get the work of Chopin, Bach, Beethoven, and would first deconstruct into particular parts. Afterwards, would identify patterns within those musical compositions, so melodies and harmonies, and afterwards would recombine to generate new compositions resembling those original composers. And this way, AMI recorded thousands of songs. Yeah, but it's been almost 30 years since the very early stages of AMI, and a lot has changed, and algorithms have improved a lot. And we have a number of different stakeholders now producing music with AI. Large corporations such as Sony Music with their Science Lab and Flow machines, Google with Magenta, IBM Watson, and some really new exciting companies like Ava from Pierre that's going to present right after me. Now, how can AI be used in music? And here I want to focus on 4 particular examples. The first one is to actually augment the composition process to help you musicians write better songs. So if you have a verse, you have a bridge, but you don't know where to go with that melody, it can give you thousands of different possibilities after it understands what you're trying to do. It can also analyze a particular career of an artist, kind of like what AMI did. So if you want to understand, for example, how did Paul McCartney write melodies in the Beatles compared to Wings, compared to his solo career? And it will identify all that data and will tell you exactly what was happening. It can also be used for the production process and also even creating new forms of experiences like live composition and performance. And I want to give you examples for all of these 4. And the first 3, I'll focus on IBM Watson. So on the augmentation for a composition, one example is the partnership between Watson and the producer Alex the Kid. So what they did was they used Watson to crawl sentiments from blogs and social media and try to understand what are people writing about, what are their emotions, what are the adjectives that they're using while expressing emotions. And they analyzed all of that data. And at the same time, Watson also analyzed songs that were at the moment in the charts. So what were all of their patterns, and gave all of that data to Alex the Kid that afterwards composed a song interestingly called Not Easy. An example of analyzing an artist's career, Watson was also used to try and understand how David Bowie composed music every time he changed a persona. So as you're familiar, he changed his persona many, many times, and then it would analyze all of his records and all of his lyrics, and to try and understand what was going in David Bowie's mind every time he had a new persona, and with that, draw different personality insights. One example for production, that's a more recent one with Watson and again with Alex the Kid. He had a new project, and he wanted to find new independent female singers. But how do you find those new independent female singers given certain variables that he wanted? So they partnered together with Spotify, and Spotify allowed Watson to crawl thousands of different independent female musicians with those particular variables, narrowed all of that down, and made Alex the Kid's job way easier. One example for a new experience was 3 years ago in Paris. There was the first concert where every single song performed had been artificially composed. And this duo here that you're seeing, they were performing a song while the algorithm was composing it, which potentially can be a new form of experience. Now, enough of stone blocks, let's talk about burgers. If you ask me what I think about hamburgers, I'll tell you that I think that they're greasy, they're not good for our health, that they increase the likelihood of heart attacks. But if you ask me if I eat them, I'll tell you absolutely yes. And why? Because I think they're delicious. And what I just described is a very common concept called the gap that exists between attitude and behavior. And understanding that is very important to understand behavioral studies. Not always because we think positively of something, we behave accordingly. And the opposite is also correct. It's not because we think negatively that we avoid that particular behavior. And just to make clear here, I'm a marketing academic, a researcher, and consultant. I don't develop technologies, but I'm highly interested in understanding how we perceive music, which is artificially composed. And that's one of the projects I've been working with for the last 2 years. And the results, although interesting, are not exactly surprising. For example, in the first part, which is a more descriptive stage, I now have over 1,000 respondents all residing here in Germany. And when I ask them, what do you think about artificial creativity and the idea that AI is composing music, the perception is quite negative. They don't like it. They believe that it's less credible. Musicians that are using it are less credible. They believe that it's less valuable. They believe that, and they also claim for awareness. In other words, if record labels are using it, that they would like to be informed that that song was artificially composed. However, if you remember burgers, often there's a gap between what we think and what we actually do. So I've been following that with a series of experiments. In one experiment, I exposed them to artificially composed music, which coincidentally, one of the songs was Genesis by Ava from Pierre's company. I had a control group and I had another group in which I told them a fictitious story, very emotional, about the motivation from the composer when writing that song. The main conclusion that I find is that there's no statistical difference as long as they like what they hear, which makes sense because music acts as a stimuli and response model. What it does is it triggers a biochemical reaction in our brain that affects our nervous system. And when we feel good, it's very hard to go against that. I've also checked that in high involvement context and low involvement context. High involvement context being moments where music is the central part of attention, like singer-songwriters and also in electronic music. For singer-songwriters and acoustic music, there's a negative effect. Listeners don't like it, and they believe that you have a lower reputation and also a lower sense of expertise. For electronic music, there's, at least I found no effect. And for low involvement music, low involvement context, where music is not the central focus of attention, I used advertising. And in advertising, for high-tech products, it actually improved the perception of the brand and of the product once they knew that that song had been artificially composed. And for low-tech products, I found no effect. And to finish up, I want to talk about synthesizers. Speaking of the future. If you go back to the 60s when synthesizers were first implemented, there was a lot of backlash. And many people didn't like it because that was not organic music, or perhaps it was not a real instrument. But what happened afterwards is that we desensitized. And why is that? Because usually when we have a new innovation that changes processes and optimizes things, we tend to be very sensitive because we're used to doing things in a particular way. But afterwards we desensitize because it does optimize process. And it's very difficult nowadays to find any recording studio without a synthesizer. And the same way that we desensitized towards synthesizers, we also desensitized towards ATM machines, online shopping, and very soon we're going to do the exact same thing with autonomous driving. If you don't have a child, or in case you're pregnant, or if you have a child soon, your child most likely would not learn how to drive. They will if they want to, but in 20 years, self-driving cars, at least I believe, will be extremely popular. So just to finish off 3 scenarios. For composers, yes, absolutely, AI is disruptive. Just like if smartphones were disruptive for photographers. But on the other hand, we're going to have way more composers than we've ever had before in our lives. And anyone with a device is going to be able to compose beautiful music. But we still need to answer a lot of questions, for example, of ownership. For musicians, we still need to tell the algorithms if those songs are good or not. It's not because they're artificially composed that necessarily they're good music. And we're always going to admire someone on stage performing and playing music. And lastly, we've got the listeners. And for the listeners, my friends, we're going to live in a world of infinite music. Not just infinite music, but infinite music that you love because it's going to be customized to you. Perhaps based on variables that you've defined, but most likely also based on biotrackers that can identify these biochemical reactions that happen in our brains and make music that we love. Thank you very much.